Literature always anticipates life. It does not copy it, but it molds it to its purpose. Oscar Wilde's poignant words shine a light on literature's impact in shaping our reality while yielding the power to influence our future. My name is Asad Lalji. I'm the curator here at the Royal Opera House. On behalf of the royal family of Gondal, Ashish Doshi, honorary director, and myself, welcome. And I should say welcome back, because many of you are regulars out here. As you know, the literary arts are considered to be one of the most important and robust verticals of Avid Learning's curatorial vision. Since our inception in 2009, we strive to bring fresh perspectives and voices to our maximum city through consistently curated programming. We have collaborated with festivals, publishing houses, authors, thought leaders to provide opportunities and experiences to the city that we long remembered. It is our pleasure to welcome back the Gyanpith Award-winning author Amitabh Ghosh. He is known for his crafting intricate narratives that seamlessly blend rigorous research as he traverses the line of fact and fiction, uncovering illuminating insights. Tonight's launch marks our trilogy with Amitabh Ghosh. Many of you were in this very room for the launch of Gun Island in 2019, Smoke and Ashes in 2023, celebrating a literary giant and his explorations in the intersection of language, history, and ecology. Congratulations in advance to Mr. Ghosh for receiving the Crossword Book Lifetime Achievement Award a little later this week. This evening is also a continuation of our 15-year long-standing partnership with Literature Live, now under the stewardship of Amy and Quasar. And HarperCollins and the Fates of Literature have wielded this special evening into existence. And this brings me to the task at hand. The Royal Opera House, Avid Learning, Literature Live, and HarperCollins India welcome you to the Mumbai launch of author Amitabh Ghosh's new book, Wild Fictions. He will be in conversation with journalist and author Raghu Karnad. I now ask Quasar Thakur Padamsi, Artistic Director of QTP Entertainment and Executive Director of Literature Live, to take this evening forward. Thank you all for being here in such big numbers, and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Asad. Welcome, everyone, to our first event of the year at Literature Live. So a Happy New Year, a Happy Literary New Year to everyone. As you saw on the short film, Literature Live does plenty of things through the year, book launches like this, and we have a couple more lined up in the weeks to come, one by Salil Tripathi and Jeet Tahil. And we also have the festival, which I'm pleased to announce will happen in November, from the 7th to the 9th of November. So I know it's a long way away, but mark your calendars. It's a new year, new year, new year. This evening is quite special. As a literature movement, a lot of the times we are asked, what is the role of a writer in society? Should they just be writing their fictions and their madness, or should they actually be contributing and should be writing out of conscience? I fell in love with Amitabh Ghosh's work when I was made to read it in my literature course, Shadow Lines, way back over 20 years ago. And since then, he has written his conscience. The books that he's written after that, his complete commitment to the environment, and this lovely, lovely piece of Wild Fictions, which is both wild and fiction, and not really that much so. So we're really happy to be part of the launch of this particular book and at this particular time. None of these events are possible without partnerships. We're really thankful to the Royal Opera House and Avid Learning for partnering with us for so long, and also for HarperCollins for making these kinds of events happen. And it gives me great pleasure to invite Udayan Mitra, the executive publisher of HarperCollins India, to introduce the session and to introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to take up a couple more minutes of your time. We are all waiting to have Amitabh and Raghu on stage for what should be a scintillating conversation. So from the publisher's side, I can only say this much. It is a proud moment for us to have published Wild Fictions, and really pleased that we are launching it in this very special venue, one of my all-time favorite venues, the Royal Opera House. And very thankful to our partners. Amitabh's work obviously needs no introduction, and Asad has already introduced him, so I won't go into that. He is a very special writer, the very first writer to be awarded, very first writer who writes in the English language to be awarded the Ganpit Award. And this November 24, he was awarded the Erasmus Prize, which is one of the most prestigious prizes in the world for environmental thinking and writing. This book is, I think many of you might have been here 1.5 years ago when we launched Smoke and Ashes at this very venue. And that was his new work of nonfiction. This is a collection of essays, and it's a collection of essays that have been written over the last 25, 27 years. And what is very special about this book is when you have all of these pieces brought together, you get a true insight into the mind of one of the greatest writers we are privileged to have, both in India, writing about India, and internationally. You have pieces here that talk about some of the concerns, some of the issues, some of the thinking that has gone into Amitabh's work in the past, both fiction and non-fiction. So we are talking about the colonial enterprise and its post-colonial effects. We are talking about imperialist violence. We are talking about capitalist agendas. All of these are political. Then we are also talking about the environment and climate change. We're talking about travel. He's a very keen traveler, and all that he's seen and learned from his travels, all of that goes into it. And he talks about the process of writing. For me, as an editor, most interestingly, he talks about the process of writing and how, when he's writing, let's say, Hungry Tide or The Glass Palace, what are the things that come, or the Ibis Trilogy, of course, what are the things that come together? This is, for me personally, this is what makes the book really, really special. For any of you who have read some of Amitabh's fiction and non-fiction, you will find this to be an absolute treasure house. And yes, I mean, I don't want to go on for too much longer because it's really, we are waiting for the conversation between Amitabh and Raghu. But it is just, I mean, it's a remarkable piece of work, really, because, I mean, there have been collections of essays, and there are, I mean, it is actually very easy to put together a collection of essays from somebody who's as prolific a writer as Amitabh. But that is not how the book happened. The book was, I mean, he curated the entire selection, chose particular pieces, wrote section introductions, a long introduction to the book itself. And when you read it, those of you who have already got a copy will know what I'm talking about. When you read it, it really gives you very keen insights into, one of the truly great minds, one of the truly great thinkers of our time. Wild Fictions is going to be published internationally this year in the UK and then followed by the US. But we at HarperCollins India are very proud to be able to bring it to readers in India first. This is the first global publication of the book. And to be able to launch it here. Before we start the conversation, I would like to, first I would like to invite Amitav Ghosh on stage, please. Raghu Karnad. And I would like to welcome back on stage Kausar, Amy Fernandez, Asad Lalji. Over to you, Amitav and Raghu.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Amitav. Welcome to Bombay and back to the Opera House. Congratulations on recent events, on your Erasmus, or the Erasmus Prize that you received in the Netherlands a few weeks ago. And congratulations on the new book. While I was reading it, I kept thinking that this book seemed like such a necessary volume for this year in particular, and for this sort of moment in world history. We have 25 or 26 essays and talks that you've done, and all over the course of roughly since the beginning of the millennium, so over 25 years. And it really feels like the essays come together as a sort of guide to the fundamental planetary shifts, ecological and also human, cultural, that have taken place over the last 25 years and brought us to where we are at the moment, what that is something we can get into later. But in addition to that big work that the book does, it's also a sort of accidental memoir, or that's how it seemed to me. It sort of feels like it comes together as a diary of your ideas and your thoughts, and we get to observe you observing the world in all these different formats, in written, published essays, obviously, but also through blog posts and through email exchanges, which you must have done without intending for them to be published, and through talks. And so it's a wonderful view into your own life, in which we can also see the conception of the ideas that went into novels, and we can see the afterlives of the novels, and there's a lot to talk about. Honestly, I could talk about each one of these essays for a full hour individually, but that would be 26 hours, and we would finish on time, but it would be tomorrow. Let's start small. Is there a particular essay from the book that is a favorite of yours or has been near the front of your mind recently?
Well, let me say, first of all, what a pleasure it is to be here with you, and my thanks to Amy and Kwasar and Asad for organizing this. It's always wonderful to be in this incredible venue, and it's great to be back here again with this book. And thank you, Raghu, for doing this. So, do I have any favorites among these? Well, let me turn that back on you. Do you have a favorite among them?
I have about 5 or 6 probably, but my partner has a specific favorite. She didn't get as much time with the book since it reached us as I did, so she has one that she really loved. It's called Confessions of a Xenophile.
Ah, yes.
There's a lot that we can say about Confessions of a Xenophile, but it is essentially a lecture that Amitav made to an Arab writers' conference in 2008.
Yes, in Cairo, yes.
Yeah, in Cairo, reflecting on what brought him to Egypt and the time he spent in Egypt some years or decades previous to that, in this period of immersion that produced in an antique land. And the title is obviously important, Confessions of a Xenophile. Don't feel bad if you don't know what a xenophile is. It's not a word that's in much use, and it's not a word that's probably in much fashion right now. Why don't you tell us what a xenophile is, Amitav?
Well, everyone knows what a xenophobe is, because a xenophobe is someone who manifests xenophobia, that is the hatred of strangers. And the xenophile is the opposite. And actually, I was thinking about that coming here, today, just from Bandra, coming into this area. The port cities of India, like Calcutta and Bombay and Madras, there's something about them which is very open to the world. All sorts of people and all sorts of influences have gone through. Whereas I've just come from Delhi this morning. Delhi is really a continental city. That is, it's very much based within the heartland, so to speak. And you don't get that sense of a kind of, you know, of an overseas influence as powerfully as you do here. That particular essay, Confessions of a Xenophile, it was written for this, you know, for that particular moment, for a sort of writers' conference in Egypt. Because I was reflecting, you know, just then my book, In an Antique Land, had been translated into Arabic. It's been translated twice into Arabic, actually. There have been 2 editions, yes. So I was trying to reflect on why I had gone to Egypt as a young doctoral student in anthropology to do my field work, and that was way, way back in 1980. You know, so long before I wrote that piece. And as you know, it's one of the strange things about, I felt this sort of connection with Egypt because of the long history of connections between these regions. And the interesting thing is that it was possible for me to go because of the non-aligned movement, essentially. You know, because there was this whole background of Nehru, Nasir, there was this whole sense of a kind of cooperative moment between countries of the global south. And that was one of the remarkable things that happened during the period of decolonization and the Cold War. You know, these sort of South-South connections suddenly became important. Once the Cold War ended and you had the unipolar moment, that disappeared. I mean, it became more like the 19th century. The whole world was more focused on the West, and Egypt forgot about India, India forgot about Egypt. And of course, right now, I don't think it would be possible for anyone to do the kind of work that I did in Egypt in that period.
Sitting in a rural village in Egypt and being treated as an authority on Indian pumps, water pumps, and
Yes.
what else? And cow and bovine health and
Yeah.
so forth. It's actually it's a very fun and also quite a funny essay. It becomes very moving and kind of politically insightful as it goes on. But the first half of it is very funny because it is just a reflection on what it means to be a young Indian man immersed in provincial 1980s Egypt, where things like water pumps and, of course, Hindi films are a very important international currency that are binding these distant societies and nationalities together. One of the reasons why this essay is so lovely to talk about is that we reflect on the period after independence and since then, and we think a lot about a national movement and a nationalist, you know, nation building, but we don't really think about often enough how much of an international movement took place at that point, and what a sense of solidarity there was for countries that, you know, that just shared, well, much in common. Like you said, we could have feelings about our fellow men and women in places like Egypt and Indonesia. And all of that feels very poignant now because we seem to be at a moment when a lot of that is being rejected, typically under a rubric of something called globalism. You hear the word globalism a lot, and there are probably good reasons and bad reasons for that to be rejected. And instead, there's a growing embrace of national and racial and very parochial communities. Do you think that xenophilia could make a comeback, and it could be a word that we use more? What really struck me about the xenophilia is that you weren't describing it as like a political ideal or a kind of ideological proposition, just as something that is inherent to human beings, that we might actually love and want to and be interested in strangers and people unlike us.
I think most people have this, you know. I mean, I think xenophilia exists everywhere in the world. So, you know, the background is really that, you know, in the West, the whole period of all the anti-colonial movements were presented as being sort of narrow, ethno-nationalist kinds of movements, and they were not. They were exactly the opposite. They were actually trying to reach out and, create these bonds. I mean, you won't find a street in New York named after Archbishop Macarius, as there is or after Julius Nyerere, whereas
Benito Juarez.
Benito Juarez, exactly, So that was an aspect of that, of sort of reaching out. But again, I have to say that, I've a long time ago, actually in 1978, 77 actually. No, what am I saying? It's 1979. I hitchhiked across the Sahara, because I was doing a course in Arabic in Tunisia. And after the course ended, I decided that I would hitchhike across the Sahara and go back through Morocco and Spain.
Hopefully your Arabic was very good at that point.
No, actually, my Arabic was terrible, and I ended up having to learn French instead of Arabic. But, I was literally hitchhiking. And I can tell you, I mean, the amount of sort of affection with which one is always greeted, in completely unlikely places. I mean, I don't know if anyone here has ever been to a town called El Oued, deep in the Sahara, in the Algerian Sahara.
No, deep in the Algerian Sahara, nobody's...
And it's, it's in a region called the Great Oriental Erg, which is these vast sand dunes everywhere. And I got off the bus, I had taken a bus there, and I sat, I sat down on the dusty roadside wondering, what the hell am I going to do here? And suddenly I see a lady in a sari walking by. And I went up to her and I said, "Oh, are you Indian?" And she looked at me and said, "Oh, are you Indian? And come and stay with us," and everything. So it turned out that back at that time, the entire medical system of the Sahara was staffed by Indians. And so we all had a wonderful time. I remember they made, after dinner, they made a pudding with, prickly pears from the cactus, and we pretended it was mangoes. Another time I hitchhiked around Wales in England, and, every night someone would offer me a place to stay. It was... So I think if you respond to people in a certain sort of open way, they welcome you in.
Amazing. I'm glad you told this story because, because it's quite fantastic, but also it leads me to another thought I had while reading the book, is that you really have been a marvelous traveler and so many, the book kind of maps out the geography of your writing life and I suppose your thinking life. And you can see from the geography where all of the interlocking pieces of your thought come. And so anyone who's familiar with Amitabh's work will know that all of these places are so important to it. Calcutta initially, and then Egypt, Southeast Asia, New York City, Italy, China, what am I missing? Other parts of the Middle East, and the entire kind of radius of the Bay of Bengal. And from these places come all the different perspectives that provide this sort of worldview and this instructive understanding of what's happening to the planet right now. And also, for people who are bigger fiction readers, you can see the various stages of the novels either coming together or surviving in your mind and in your thoughts afterwards. Because a subject doesn't end when you finish writing the book, right? It stays with you and your ideas continue to develop and you sort of carry this cast of ideas and characters along.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the ideas, the characters, all of that, go along with you. The one thing that I would add there is that you mentioned Southeast Asia, but really, especially over the last 10, 15 years, I've become very, very interested in Indonesia. I've been traveling to Indonesia a lot. I wrote about Indonesia in my book, The Nutmeg's Curse. And in so many ways, I find Indonesia is just, just the most interesting country anywhere, And it's a curious thing, we are this great sort of peninsular country, So there's a continental part, which is like Delhi, and then there's the whole maritime region, which is completely different, but which has continuities with the other seaboards around us. So, for example, when you go to, for example, Zanzibar, you recognize it immediately as something that's recognizable to you as someone who knows Bombay, who knows Calcutta. And you get that sense constantly again in Indonesia, of these composite cultures which grow up exchanging ideas and exchanging, trade certainly, for millennia.
And both India and Indonesia have this pivotal early part in the story of colonialism and the eventual European domination of the world, and of our sort of model of resource extraction as the basis of global economic rules, and that's there in the nutmeg curse. And Indonesia, of course, is another country with which we once had these bonds of fellowship that now just don't seem to exist.
But it's coming back. I think that's what's the interesting thing, because with the rubric of BRICS, I think we are reverting, actually. We're going back from that unipolar moment, which is collapsing around us, as we can see, We see the ruins of that sort of Western unilateralism now, just crumbling around us. And in its place, we now have this new sort of political organization, BRICS. I don't know what will come of it or what, but it is definitely a sort of successor to Bandung, to the non-aligned movement. And actually, it's a really remarkable thing. I mean, when the Bandung conference happened, way back in the 50s, the West did everything possible to undermine it. And I think we're going to see the same in relation to BRICS. They're going to try and undermine it as far as it's possible. But at the same time, it is a part of a continuing history of global South relations.
Well, there's much to say that I could pick up on from there, but let me stay with Confessions of a Xenophile for one more question. One of the lovely things about it, and it's something that brings out something very characteristic of your writing, of what I think of as the Amitav Ghosh sort of approach, is that it's sort of, when you're reading it, you sort of feel a bridge going back through time. So here we are in 2025. We're reading an essay or a talk that was written in 2008 about a book, or concerning a book that was published in 1992, and that book is drawing on an experience from 1980, and that experience is partly motivated by or inspired by the discovery of a letter by a sort of, a parallel figure or an avatar, as Amitav says, from the 12th century. So this bridge through time that you find yourself kind of walking down as you read various of these essays is really one of the great pleasures of reading your work in general. I'm curious about how it was for you, because I'm going to guess that you don't spend a lot of time rereading your old talks and essays, because you're usually writing new ones. So what was it like to turn back to your archive and I don't know, make selections, find what was still most rich to you?
It's interesting that you say that. Yes, I mean, going back over these essays written over the last 25 years, I found that actually they hold up. They hold up over time, and on the whole, there's a remarkable sort of consistency to them. They link up with things I've been writing since, things I've been writing later. I think what is most interesting to me is that, around about the year 2000, I started doing the research for my novel, The Hungry Tide, and that took me to the Sundarban. And even back then, in the year 2000, you could see the impacts of climate change as they were affecting the Sundarban. And it was really from then on that I started paying very close attention, to environmental issues. to climate change, to biodiversity loss, and all these other vectors of our current planetary crisis. And I think that's something that runs through the whole book. I mean, one of the earliest pieces in the book is actually about 9/11, because I happened to be in New York that day, on the day of 9/11, and I was taking, it was my daughter's first day in a new school. And she actually, I remember going to get her, once the school started to shut down at about 11 in the morning. My son and I, my son is younger, he hadn't joined school then, we walked through Brooklyn, with these masses of people pouring over the Brooklyn Bridge, all covered in ash, and just looking like zombies, And when we finally got to my daughter's school, there she was in the foyer, and she came running up to me and she said, "Baba, I saw it all through the windows of my history class." And it was literally, she and her class literally saw the planes hitting the World Trade Center. I didn't see it, but what she said really resonated with me, because I felt I had just seen this entire history unfolding in front of my eyes.
Yeah, I mean, there's more to that story, and there's more to your experience of 9/11, and it comes very close to home for you and for Debbie and your families. I'm tempted to ask you to tell us more of that story, just because in some ways 9/11 seems like the moment that initiates the book, that initiates the era that the book is really about, which is this era when this meltdown begins. And this idea from the preceding 10 years that Pax Americana and a neoliberal world, a global neoliberal economy and a unipolar world order sort of dominated by America is going to stabilize the world for, the indefinite future and guarantee prosperity and freedom to all, quickly starts to come undone. And that is, the epochal moment that it begins. And I don't know if it initiates, but then in that moment you can see this, or in the years since then, this critique Amitav has, which is a very strongly worded critique, really comes to the fore, which is that imperialism, which existed long in the past, but also exists in new forms today, and that unbridled capitalism are never going to create a stable world order, and that they are going to meet their challenges. They'll meet their challenges in events like 9/11, but they'll meet more profound challenges from things like climate change. And these moving parts are the things that this kind of volume brings together. These are all of the sort of things that quite amazingly have been your subjects and things you've been paying attention to from the beginning. Migration, ecology, war, and imperialism, probably one or two, and the natural world. These are the things that are sort of the crisis that's coming together that we're living through right now. But do you want to tell more about the 9/11 story? It's
absolutely. But to tell the story, I need to go back a little bit, because I lived in Egypt in this small village in a province called Beheira, which is between Alexandria and Cairo, just almost exactly halfway. This village was near a town called Damanhur. And, it was a very poor village. I was living in a chicken coop. There was no electricity in the village then. Everything I did, I had to do with a hurricane lamp, So it was a bit like Calcutta in the 1970s. But back then I was used to all that. So I lived in this village, and already then you could see the sort of rumblings of a kind of fundamentalism which hadn't existed before. Young men, boys, would go around ordering their mothers to wear the hijab and so on. And that had never happened in this area before. Women never wore the hijab. They wore a scarf, but they never wore the sort of whole hijab thing. So you could see that developing, and over the years, so from about 1982, 83, after the Iran-Iraq war ended, Iraq was desperately short of manpower. So they started importing a lot of Egyptian men. I think there were 2 or 3 million Egyptians living in Iraq, working there. And, suddenly it had this huge impact on this village. In the 1980s, when I used to visit this village, I couldn't believe it. Suddenly, everyone was building houses, they were getting fridges and stuff like that. A bit like, the changes we've observed along the West Coast in India. Then came 1991, the first Gulf War. And my book, In an Antique Land, actually ends with this great exodus out of Iraq by, these Egyptian workers just waiting to cross the Red Sea. And that was devastating for the entire economy of this region. So suddenly you had all these young men who had no prospect of employment, who, having seen better times, were suddenly beggared. And you could just sense then the rage that was sprouting over there, So, going back to 1991, 1992, when I was writing the end of In an Antique Land, I said in the book, this is going to end very, very badly, because you could just sense the anger and the rage that was seething in that region. And sure enough, it turned out, on 9/11. This thing 9/11 happened literally all around me. But that was not the first terrorist incident of 2001. 2001 also, was the date of the great airport attack in Colombo. And I happened to be in Colombo 5 days later, so I remember my plane landing in the midst of all that wreckage. At that moment, you could sense that some sort of new era is beginning here, within the wreckage that was all around us. And so the really weird thing is that I discovered the day after 9/11 that the guy who had led these attacks, he was an Egyptian called Muhammad Atta. And he was actually, his origins lay in a little village very close to the village that I had worked in. Wow. So it was a strange thing. You had this sense of a sort of circle coming, drawing close.
Yes, really. And the kind of the upshot of that is, or rather, the crisis that kind of becomes initiated in the American empire has a very interesting counterpart. Sorry, let me rephrase this. One thing that you notice in this period, and you write about in the book, is that with the rise and then the crisis of the American empire, for lack of a more sophisticated phrase, there's also a rehabilitation of an earlier empire in terms of historical discourse, specifically the British Empire. It's not a rehabilitation of the idea of empire in general. It's not like the historians are writing books talking about how the Austro-Hungarian Empire was driven by noble ideals, but there's a sort of revision of the view of the British Empire, and you note that there was a period when the British Empire was starting to look good to the world again. And this is most directly addressed in, I think, a review that you wrote of Shashi Tharoor's An Era of Darkness. But it could equally be, but it could also be, your own book, Smoke and Ashes, the recent one, is equally a pushback against this rehabilitation of the British Empire. And that sort of led me to think that what's happening over the last 25 years, or maybe slightly longer, isn't just a regression in terms of the physical aspect of the world, but there's also some regress happening intellectually. And how we view empire is a big part of this.
I think the ground has fundamentally shifted there. I think Anglo-American elites have really tried to resuscitate the idea of empire. You know, the whole thing about when people talk about was the British Empire good or not, they're not really talking about the past. They're talking about the present. They're talking about their plans for the future. You know, that's really that's really what is at issue there. So, but I think the ground has really fundamentally shifted during the COVID pandemic. You remember the great uprisings against the statues of enslavers and so on? Yeah. I must say, I honestly never thought I would in my life see that happening, you know, on the streets around me. And as it happened, it was in exactly that year that I was writing my book, The Nutmeg's Curse, which begins with this incredibly appalling episode in Dutch colonial history, when the Dutch go to this island, this tiny archipelago called the Banda Islands, you know, which is at the far eastern end of Indonesia, actually closer to Australia than to Java. But these incredibly obscure islands were, at one point in time, the center of the world, in a sense, because they produced two of the world's most important commodities. One was the nutmeg, and the other was mace. Mace is just the outer covering of the nutmeg. You know, so these islanders were rich and prosperous, and everybody sought them out. So in 1600, the Dutch turn up there, you know, and they try to force a sort of a monopoly contract on them, and of course the islanders resist. So in 1621, the Dutch Governor-General of the East Indies, a man called Jan Pietersen Koen, he took a fleet to this island, and literally within a period of basically 6 weeks, completely exterminated the islanders. You know, there were a population of about 15,000. About a third were just killed. A third were driven into the hills where they died of starvation and disease. The other third were enslaved. The islands were completely depopulated. And then they were handed over to Dutch planters. And the planters, for the next 250 years, they were supplied with slaves by the Dutch East India Company. And most of these slaves actually came from India. You know, it's an astonishing thing. So, you know, it's such a grisly and horrifying story. But I think one of the shifts that you're talking about is that, as you just said, I was given the Erasmus Prize in the Netherlands, and I was given the prize by the King of the Netherlands and by the royal family. And this is all they wanted to talk about. You know, I was taken to the town of Hoorn, which is where Jan Pietersen Koen came from. So, you know, there's been a sort of real reckoning with European colonial history. And the Dutch, to their great credit, they did many terrible things, but also to their great credit, they were the first of the great European empires to create a reckoning with this history. It goes back to the 1850s. They had a writer called Multatuli who wrote a very powerful denunciation of Dutch imperialism in Java. The Queen of the Netherlands, you know, I think her name was Queen Wilhelmina. In 1900, she apologized to the people of Java for what the Dutch Empire had done. Can you imagine Queen Victoria doing that? I mean, can you imagine Prince Charles doing that even today? No?
No. And I did
King
not
Charles,
know that.
yes.
Thank you. In the Royal Opera House, we have to get these things right. I didn't know that about the Dutch Empire at all. And yes, clearly the British society is falling well behind in terms of its reckoning with its empire. Although it has been pushed by books like Shashi Tharoor's book, and I want to make another endorsement for Smoke and Ashes, which is completely eye-opening, an astonishing book in terms of the picture it'll reveal of imperialism.
A lot of it is about the history of Bombay and opium.
Indeed, exactly. I was wondering whether Amitabh was going to launch a broadside at this city, but there's a lot to learn about Bombay, and where all of your family, you know, estates come from. But the American empire, I don't want to harp on about the American empire, but it seems like a very salient thing right now with what's going to, the mystery of what's going to happen with it, to it in the next week or so. It's going to have a new leader on January 20th, and that only seems like a mark of the kind of crisis it's going through.
But I wouldn't say that this crisis is limited to America. But certainly, America is now living through a sort of civilizational crisis, I would say. And in Smoke and Ashes, I make the argument that what America is going through now is a reversal of the civilizational crisis that China went through in the 19th century. On the one hand, there's this incredible opioid crisis, which has really hollowed out, especially the working class regions of industrial America. And that happened in China. There's a complete collapse in institutions, of faith in institutions. There's incredible corruption that spread through, the most trusted institutions like law enforcement agencies, but also doctors, companies that produce pharmaceuticals and so on, because really the pharmaceutical industry started distributing opioids on this incredibly large scale because they got permission from the Food and Drugs Administration, which they had actually systematically corrupted, So, in so many ways, you can see really that today, America is in the grip of this incredible political and I would say cultural crisis. And these swings that we are seeing, I think Trump is a manifestation of that,
And of course, on the opposite coast from Washington, D.C., many of you will be aware, we're seeing a really lurid and vivid demonstration of what climate change means. And one of the richest cities in the world is failing to battle flames that are burning down houses. But I don't want to drag us down into depression at this point in the evening. We have 4 more years of a Trump presidency and plenty of time in our own country to worry about. The book is full of surprising things. It's there's so many things that I could talk about with pleasure. One of them is an email exchange between Amitav and, is he a political scientist?
No, he's a historian, Dipesh Chakravarti.
And the historian Dipesh Chakravarti. Can you tell us? We can't go into all of the substance of what's discussed in that email, but tell us about what prompted that email and how come that exchange makes it into the book.
Well, what happened was I read Dipesh Chakravarti. He's one of the great historians of our time. He teaches at the University of Chicago, and he published this book called Provincializing Europe, and it's a very interesting book about, more centered on Bengal than other parts of India, but about working class history and so on. And after I read it, I liked it a lot, the book, but I felt that there was this silence which has happened across the writing of Indian history, which is that we Indians find it very hard to deal with the question of race, as it applies to empire. Even though race was absolutely central, to the British Empire. It was essentially a racial system. But we find it very hard to address those questions. And I had just finished writing The Glass Palace, which deals with many of these questions in a very central way. You've written about the same things, the war in Southeast Asia, what happens with the Indians who turned against the British Empire, basically in Malaysia, and they found the Indian National Army and so on. So I was very interested in these questions. And I wrote him this letter, he responded, we continued to correspond for just over 15 days. It was a very productive correspondence, really. And at the end of it, after we had written it, I think I posted it on my blog or something. And then, the Journal of Radical History, I think it's called, wanted to publish it, so they did. And it's had a long afterlife. People read it. And strangely enough, I didn't know Deepesh then. I know him very well now. But both of us have really also taken this turn towards writing about the history of climate.
I think I just got the signal that we'll be inviting questions from all of you in just a moment, because I just want to tip my hat to one more essay that is one of the lightest essays in the book. Also concerns climate. As I just realized today, the essay suddenly touched my personal life, because as I was getting ready for this evening and rushing around my flat and thinking about the book, the typical thing happened, the Bombay thing, which is that you've showered and then you get dressed and then you start sweating before you've even left the house. And I thought, oh God, what's going on? I'm getting hot sweating before I even get in the taxi. And then I remembered that Amitav has an essay about the banyan, and as a result of which, I made this very smart move and wore a banyan for the first time in a while, and it works perfectly. I'm perfectly dry. And tell us about your thoughts about the banyan, and then we will hear from you guys.
Well, I wrote that essay because, Vogue India had given my daughter a summer internship. She came to Bombay, she worked for Vogue, but the quid pro quo was that I would have to write an essay for them. And I thought, what can I write an essay for Vogue? And then I thought, yes, I'll write about the banyan, because I'm actually fascinated by banyans. I always wear a banyan, and I always have. If I don't, I feel kind of ill, And I think that's quite common, certainly amongst Indians of my generation.
There's no going back.
But this word banyan is so interesting, because banyan is actually just bania. But the reason why it's called banyan is because it was transcribed in Arabic as a plural, so it becomes bani, bania, and then banyan, as it were, summoning up a kind of plural. So if you go to the Victoria and Albert Museum, there are these garments called banyans. They're like incredibly ornate dressing gowns, which the British nabobs used to wear. Incredibly ornate. You can't believe how ornate they are. But from that, the banyan slowly evolves into this very sort of humble garment. And I think what connects them is basically lascars. As it were, the banyan became a version of the seaman's undershirt. And from that it came into our usage, and it found its way onto our persons.
That's right. And another form of a past, another expression of the past in the present day and in the present moment, and as you said, on our person. Will the lights come up for us to do the Q&A?
Hi, Amitav. Whether you can recognize me, I'm Praveen.
Hi, Praveen.
Good to see you. Lovely
Nice
hearing
to
this
see
conversation. Would love to hear this going on for 26 hours if possible. but I don't want to miss out on a theme which seemed to have missed this discussion is China, and not from the opioid perspective, but from whatever you've been writing and whatever I've been following for 47 years. What I want to hear from you, has the West already abdicated its climate leadership to China?
That's a very good question. I mean, in fact, it's certainly the case that China leads in all the technologies of alternative energy. But that begs the question of whether alternative energy is going to solve, the climate problem. And I don't think it is, but there can be no doubt that China has absolutely taken the leadership. China now has an absolute stranglehold, even on the chains of production. For solar panels, for electric vehicles and everything. I mean, I think it is a tectonic shift, because as we are speaking here, I mean, Germany is going through this time of essentially deindustrialization, because they just stuck to the old-fashioned, internal combustion engine, and they now find themselves completely outflanked and they don't know how to catch up. I think in all those ways we are really seeing an absolutely tectonic shift on all matters of production.
The Great Derangement has a fascinating few passages about how in China had its own beginnings of a carbon-based economy and of a, perhaps even an industrial revolution, which was cut short by the European imperial moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's another sort of circle that seems to be completing now.
Well, we did too. I mean, in the early 19th century, the Indian entrepreneurs were desperately keen to adopt the fossil fuel, the carbon economy. In Bengal, there was Dwarkanath Tagore. Here you had the Wadias and several other, the Wadias were basically engineers, and they were very keen to adopt. And in fact, one of the Wadias invented a new kind of steam engine and so on. But essentially, the British, strangled the development of, a carbon economy here, because they wanted us to produce a solar-based product, basically plants and so on, of various kinds.
Was there someone over in the back?
Yeah, here. Hi. So when you were talking about, port cities and so on, port cities being the sites of cultural collaboration, I was thinking of more modern ports like Mundra or Virinjam or, even Uran, JNPT. These are all like enclosed off spaces where you don't have this kind of cultural collaboration. So do you think that they have the potential to have those conversations, to generate those conversations that, ports might have had maybe 100 years ago?
No, absolutely not. Because what you see today with the ports is that they're very highly securitized, very highly militarized spaces. And also they don't need as much manual labor, as much work, So they don't become centers for sort of working class interactions, because a few workers can manipulate all the big cranes and all the loading and unloading. So that form of interaction that grew up around ports like Bombay and Calcutta, I don't think these new ports are going to have that effect at all. In fact, Dubai has a place called the Logistics City, which is actually a very interesting installation if you look at it. It's completely securitized. It's completely, subjected to a kind of a military sort of rule. It's shut off from everything around it. And what's most interesting about these ports is that they're states of exception. That is, they don't follow the legal systems of whichever country they may be in. And curiously enough, this model has actually been adopted also in the United States. The port of Oakland, for example, similarly is incredibly militarized, securitized. This is a model that's spreading around the world. And I don't think it's going to create the sort of cultural richness that the ports of the past did.
Hi. So you made a reference to BRICS.
Yes.
And the current topic of discussion in Bombay, at least, is why has Modi not been invited to Trump's inauguration? And is there a link? Now they invited China. They can't leave them out. India is a key BRICS country. Is there a connection there?
Well, of all the major BRICS members, I think India is the one that's most ambivalent, because India wants to preserve a certain kind of strategic autonomy in relation to the other BRICS countries, I think. That's my reading of it. And, America's now at a point where you're for us or you're against us. So if anyone is, as it were, sitting on a fence, that's not going to do it for them. And I think that may be the reason. But I think, it's the right policy. I mean, India should preserve a certain kind of strategic autonomy in relation to all the major world powers. I mean, look, I think what the US is really angry about is that we are importing so much of this Russian oil. and then we're re-exporting it, to Europe. It's become a very major source of revenue for us, and they're really enraged about it, and they want to find a way of cutting us off.
So then I have to ask you just one thing. Does that mean that we're going to pay a huge price for this?
Are we going to pay a huge price for this? I don't know. I doubt it, because really, I mean, the United States also needs us, It needs partners in Asia, so, we are not dispensable in that way.
One more question. Let's have a good one. Who's got a good one?
There are two over here. Oh,
Okay.
and two back
that's
there.
you already
Sorry,
have
I
the
have a mic.
Oh, there are
Go
many.
ahead.
Hi. Mike Davis, the writer, has written a lot about, the fact that LA deserves to burn and that, it will eventually, and it has. And unfortunately, he passed away, I think, 2 years ago. And, he was always silenced, as a doomsayer, as a sort of ghost of the feast. I wonder, do you have a coda to, the Great Derangement? Because one of the points you made there were that the global imagination couldn't get their hands around climate change, get their heads around climate change, and understand it, and express it in fiction and in culture. And I wonder, is there an updated
Great
perspective
question.
on
Thank
Great
you.
question, thank you. Yes, I've actually been rereading Mike Davis's Ecology of Fear, which is about all the sorts of environmental threats that Los Angeles faces. And it's a really remarkable thing. I mean, these fires in Los Angeles are absolutely recurrent. I mean, they happen all the time. Malibu especially, has been devastated by fire repeatedly. And yet, they've never declared, Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed parks and so on in New York as well. So the Olmsteds drew up this really detailed plan for how Los Angeles should develop. And they conceived of Los Angeles as a series of parks. So Malibu was to be a park, the Los Angeles River was to be a park, but of course the Los Angeles River got, built over and sort of so-called contained. So that's where you see all those big chases in the Terminator movies and so on. But this is fundamentally a catastrophic environment. It swings between extremes of many kinds, most of all, huge downpours sometimes. There was one such downpour a couple of years ago, you remember? And the moment I saw that, I thought, oh my God, that's going to produce enormous amounts of kindling for these fires, which is exactly what happened. And now they've gone through this incredible period of desiccation, which is completely related to climate change. So what you see in this particular set of disasters is something that I think we see all around the world now. So you have climate change intensifying certain climatic patterns, but that becomes hugely magnified by patterns of settlement, patterns of building, and you can see that in Chennai, for example. You build over these drainage channels. You build sort of massive luxury housing inside a drainage channel. So what's going to happen? Obviously, at some point, there's going to be this incredible flood. So, that's really the sort of weirdness of what we are seeing around us. And I think it's completely driven by the real estate industry. And one of the news reports I read, which was really disquieting about Los Angeles, Altadena, which is one of the neighborhoods that's going up in flames. A great science fiction writer who wrote about climate change, Octavia
Stan
Butler.
Robinson. Oh, Octavia Robinson.
Yeah, she lived there. She's actually buried there. Anyway, so it's been completely burnt down. But already, real estate companies are going to the people and trying to buy out the land, because they plan to rebuild in exactly the same way. So Malibu, for example, after every fire, they rebuilt on a bigger, grander scale. So it went on and on. The houses got bigger, the fires got bigger. It's a completely crazy form of settlement. And it's completely driven by the real estate industries, because For the realist, for a realtor, for someone who's constructing, these houses, it's a very short-term investment on which they make a lot of money. They're not left holding the long-term risk. The long-term risk is held by the people who move into those apartments. And I think that's what we are seeing. We are seeing it in Mumbai, we are seeing it in Chennai, we are seeing it now, most of all, we are seeing it in the Himalaya. People are moving into incredibly fragile ecosystems, which are definitely going to collapse.
And that's just an example of what Amitav calls a catastrophic convergence. The way that economic and climate systems and ideological systems have been converging to produce a state of crisis. And the entire book kind of tours us through the different interlocking parts of these catastrophic convergences. Practically everyone, well, many of the essays in this book are individually worth the price of the book. We are sort of running out of time, but we could do one more if you'd like.
Yes, there's someone.
Good evening. There are two things that we are facing with which we've never dealt with before, which is artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency, both of which are absolute hogs of energy and are creating more problems for us. So intertwined with that is a notion that crypto is going to save, or Bitcoin is going to save US dominance over BRICS, because Trump is threatening to use that as a backup currency. So do you see crypto as becoming a gold standard or equivalent to a gold standard? And then what are your general thoughts about how do we rein in AI and crypto from completely devastating our environment rather?
And have you invested in any of it?
Well, my son, who's in his early 30s, he tried to get me to invest in Bitcoin. And I said to him, I don't ever invest in anything I don't understand. So really, I don't know, how Bitcoin works, and I wouldn't ever touch it, really. But what I do see is also Putin has embraced cryptocurrencies. So I don't think cryptocurrency is necessarily going to work out in favor of any one geopolitical regime. I think it's going to be much more complicated. As for AI, well, I use AI all the time now. I just find it incredibly helpful. It answers letters so well, and
I thought we were having a great correspondence this past week. That explains it.
But it still can't get my name right. So.
And with that, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Amitav.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Amitav, for that enlightening conversation. As they say, third time's the charm. So hopefully the fourth one will also be as good. The author will be signing books outside. Books are available for sale, so please go get your books and have them signed. Thank you, Raghu, for your very thoughtful question. I forgot my banyan, but I wore a bandi, so it's the same thing. The evening would not have been possible without our partners. Literature Live, special thanks to Amy Kwasar and the QTP team, HarperCollins, Anand, Akriti, and Udyan. And lastly, the Royal Opera House team and Avid Learning. Continuing our literary extravaganza this month, we have another HarperCollins author with us. English comedian, actor, writer, and TV personality David Walliams will be at the Opera House on Sunday morning. So in case interested, please do join us. Check out our website or stalk us on Instagram, and hopefully we'll see you soon.